The night that changed everything. Jack Callahan's tires crunched over broken glass as he pulled his weathered Ford into the dark alley. The red and blue lights of patrol cars pulsed against the crumbling brick walls, casting eerie shadows that flickered like ghosts of the past. The acrid smell of gunpowder still lingered in the cold night air, mixed with the metallic tang of blood and the musty stench of damp concrete. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his calloused hands betraying the tension rising within him. He shouldn't be here. Retirement was supposed to mean peace, a quiet life away from crime scenes and late-night chases. His security consulting job kept him in the safety of his home office, reviewing case files from behind a desk. But old habits died hard. The police scanner he kept in his study had crackled to life an hour ago, and the moment he heard the code for a violent crime scene, his instincts had taken over. Jack stepped out of the car, his heavy boots crunching against shattered glass. His sharp eyes scanned the scene, uniformed officers securing the perimeter, crime scene investigators meticulously marking evidence, and paramedics attending to the wounded. It was chaos, but to Jack, it was familiar, a world he thought he had left behind. "Jack?" A voice called out from the crowd. He turned to see Detective Maria Vasquez, a younger officer he had mentored years ago, now leading cases of her own. Her dark eyes narrowed as she approached, hands stuffed in the pockets of her leather jacket. "What are you doing here?" "You're retired, remember?" she asked, though there was no real hostility in her tone. Jack exhaled. "Heard the call. Just wanted to see if I could help." Maria sighed but didn't push him away. She knew better than to argue. "It's bad, Jack." She motioned toward the end of the alley. "Cartel-related, most likely. A deal gone wrong. 4 dead." Jack followed her gaze, his stomach tightening at the sight of the lifeless bodies sprawled across the ground. Blood pooled beneath them, painting dark rivers along the cracked pavement. "Who's the target?" he asked. Maria pulled out her notepad. "We believe the main target was Marco Ruiz. Known drug trafficker. The other 3? Likely just casualties. We're still piecing it together." Jack nodded grimly. He'd crossed paths with Marco Ruiz back when he was still on the force. A ruthless enforcer, the man had left a trail of bodies in his wake. But as Jack studied the crime scene, something tugged at the back of his mind, something was off. His gut, honed by decades of experience, told him there was more to this than just a failed deal. Then, a sound. Faint, almost imperceptible beneath the noise of the crime scene. A cry. Jack stiffened. His ears strained. It wasn't the wail of sirens or the murmured conversations of officers. It was softer, weaker. A baby's cry. His pulse quickened as he turned his head, scanning the shadows. "Do you hear that?" Maria frowned. "Hear what?" Jack didn't answer. Instead, he followed the sound, moving deeper into the alley. It was coming from a dumpster, its rusted lid slightly ajar. His heart pounded as he reached for it, lifting the lid with steady hands. Inside, wrapped in blood-stained blankets, were 2 newborn babies. Twins. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Their tiny bodies trembled from the cold, their cries growing weaker. Someone had left them here, discarded them like trash in the aftermath of the massacre. "Jesus," Maria whispered, stepping up beside him. "Who would do this?" Jack didn't have an answer. His instincts took over. Without hesitation, he reached into the dumpster, cradling the fragile infants in his arms. Their bodies were so light, so fragile, their skin clammy from the chill. He held them close to his chest, his warmth soothing their desperate cries. "We need paramedics," he barked over his shoulder. Maria was already signaling them over, her face pale with shock. Jack stared down at the babies, his mind racing. Were they Marco Ruiz's children? Or did they belong to one of the other victims? And why had they been left here, left to die? The thought sent a surge of anger through him. No child should be abandoned this way. As the paramedics arrived, Jack hesitated before handing the twins over. A strange feeling gripped his chest, something unfamiliar yet undeniable. A connection. He had spent years chasing criminals, putting the worst of humanity behind bars. He had seen death, destruction, and the cost of violence. But now, looking at these two helpless lives, he felt something stir deep within him. A purpose. "They'll be taken to Child Protective Services," one of the paramedics said. Jack's jaw tightened. He knew what that meant. The system was overcrowded, burdened. These babies would be shuffled between foster homes, never truly finding stability. He couldn't let that happen. As the paramedics prepared to leave, Jack made a decision, one that would change the course of his life forever. "I'll take them," he said firmly. Maria's eyes widened. "Jack, that's not how this works." "I'll make it work," he countered. "I'll go through the proper channels, do whatever I have to. But these boys, they're coming with me." Maria hesitated, then sighed. "You really think you can do this?" Jack looked down at the twins, his heart answering before his mind could. Yes. Because in that moment, Jack Callahan, retired cop, lifelong bachelor, a man who had spent years chasing criminals, had just become a father. A father's promise. Jack Callahan had faced some of the worst criminals the city had to offer. He had walked through crime scenes where bodies lay in pools of blood, stood in courtrooms as murderers received their sentences, and seen things that would haunt most men in their sleep. But nothing in his long career had prepared him for this, holding two fragile newborns in his arms, their tiny fingers curling weakly against his chest. The paramedics had insisted on taking the babies to the hospital for immediate care. Jack had agreed, reluctantly, but only on the condition that he stay with them. Now, he sat in the hospital room, staring at the two tiny figures lying in incubators. They had been cleaned, dressed in soft white onesies, and hooked up to monitors that beeped steadily. The doctors had assured him that, despite being premature and underweight, they would survive. But survival wasn't enough. Jack wanted them to have more than that. Maria Vasquez leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You're really doing this, aren't you?" Jack didn't take his eyes off the babies. "Yeah. I am." She sighed, stepping closer. "Jack, this isn't like taking in a stray dog. This is a lifetime commitment. Diapers, formula, sleepless nights. And what about when they start asking questions? What are you going to tell them about where they came from?" Jack exhaled slowly. He had been thinking about that non-stop. "I don't have all the answers," he admitted. "But I know one thing, I can't let them grow up thinking they weren't wanted." Maria hesitated, then softened. "You really care about them?" Jack nodded. "I don't know why, Maria. I feel like they were meant to find me." She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "All right. I won't stop you. But this isn't gonna be easy." Jack smirked. "Nothing worth doing ever is." Months later. Jack had thought he was prepared. He wasn't. Raising twins was an entirely different kind of battle. He was used to order, structure, and control. But these babies, who he had named Liam and Noah, had turned his life into organized chaos. Morning started before dawn with hungry cries that jolted him awake. He learned to make formula one-handed while holding a wailing infant in the other. Diapers? He had gone through more than he thought humanly possible. Sleep? A distant memory. And yet, despite the exhaustion, he found himself smiling more than he had in years. The first time Noah grasped his finger, Jack had felt something in his heart crack open. When Liam gave him a sleepy, gummy smile after a feeding, he knew there was no turning back. He wasn't just some retired cop taking care of 2 kids. He was their father. 2 years later. The house had changed. Where it was once quiet and orderly, it was now filled with laughter, toys scattered across the floor, and the pitter-patter of little feet running through the halls. Jack had adapted, trading his old life of crime fighting for a life of bedtime stories and scraped knees. Liam was the wild one. Climbing on furniture, laughing loudly, and always testing the limits of what he could get away with. Noah, on the other hand, was quiet and observant, clinging to Jack's side as if afraid the world would take him away. Jack loved them both fiercely. "Daddy, look!" Liam shouted, proudly holding up a drawing he had made. Jack took the paper, smiling at the colorful scribbles that vaguely resembled 3 stick figures. "Is this us?" Liam nodded eagerly. "That's me, that's Noah, and that's you." Jack's heart swelled. "Looks just like us, buddy." Noah tugged at Jack's sleeve. "Daddy?" Jack crouched down. "Yeah, kiddo?" The little boy hesitated, his big brown eyes searching Jack's face. "Are you always gonna be our daddy?" Jack froze, his breath catching in his throat. It was the first time either of them had asked a question like that. Jack placed a hand on Noah's small shoulder, his voice steady and firm. "Always, buddy. No matter what." Noah smiled softly, wrapping his tiny arms around Jack's neck. Jack held him close, knowing he would do anything, to protect these boys. But the past has a way of creeping back when you least expect it. 5 years later. Jack never thought about the crime scene anymore. As far as he was concerned, that night in the alley was in the past. Liam and Noah were 7 now, thriving, happy, and full of life. They had no idea where they came from, and Jack had no intention of telling them. As far as he was concerned, they were his sons, and that was all that mattered. Until the letter arrived. Jack found it in the mailbox one evening, nestled between bills and junk mail. There was no return address, just his name written in shaky handwriting. Frowning, he tore it open. The words inside sent ice through his veins. "You raised the sons of a monster." Jack's hands trembled as he read it again. His mind raced. Who sent this? What did it mean? He had never learned the true identity of the twins' parents. He had assumed, based on the crime scene, that they were connected to the victims of the shooting that night. But now, doubt clawed at him. Had he been wrong? Jack's grip tightened on the paper. His instincts, the same instincts that had kept him alive for years as a cop, told him this wasn't just some prank. Someone out there knew something. And they wanted him to know it too. Jack's eyes darted toward the house, where he could hear Liam and Noah laughing in the living room. His stomach twisted. He had spent years building a safe, happy life for them. But if this letter was telling the truth, then everything he thought he knew was about to come crashing down. Jack took a deep breath, clenching his fists. No matter what secrets the past held, one thing was certain, he wasn't about to let anyone take his sons away from him. You said. Buried truths. Jack sat in his dimly lit study, the letter resting on the desk before him like a loaded gun. He had faced criminals, liars, and killers, but nothing in his decades as a cop had prepared him for this, an anonymous note threatening the very foundation of the family he had built. You raised the sons of a monster. The words gnawed at him, relentless and insidious, refusing to leave his mind. What did it mean? Who was this monster? Was it their biological father? And if so, what had he done? Jack leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. His old instincts told him not to ignore this. He had spent years trusting his gut, and it had never steered him wrong. He had to find out the truth. Digging into the past. His first step was the crime scene. He retrieved his old case files, the ones he had managed to obtain when he adopted the twins. There wasn't much, just an autopsy report on the victims and a brief police report that listed Marco Ruiz as the primary target. Marco Ruiz had been a cartel enforcer, but according to the case notes, he was killed in the alley that night. The other 3 bodies belonged to his associates, small-time criminals with rap sheets that ranged from drug trafficking to assault. Jack frowned. There was no mention of a woman. But the twins had to have come from somewhere. Their mother had to have been there, yet there was no record of her. A chill ran down his spine. Was she one of the dead? Or had she vanished? Jack grabbed his phone and called Maria Vasquez. It rang twice before she picked up. "Jack," she answered, surprised. "It's been a while." "I need a favor," Jack said without preamble. "Do you remember that crime scene from 7 years ago? The one with Marco Ruiz?" There was a pause. "Yeah, I remember. That was a mess. I need everything on that case, things that weren't in the official report." Maria sighed. "Jack, you're not a cop anymore." "I know. But I need to know the truth." Maria was quiet for a moment. Then, in a lower voice, she said, "Meet me at the precinct tomorrow. I'll see what I can pull up." Jack nodded. "Thanks, Maria." He hung up, staring at the letter again. Whoever sent it wanted him to question everything. Well, they got their wish. A father's worst fear. Jack barely slept that night. He lay awake, listening to the soft breathing of Liam and Noah from their rooms. What if they found out the truth? They were just kids, happy, innocent kids who had no idea where they came from. To them, Jack was their father, their protector. Would they still look at him the same way if they learned the truth? Would they still love him? Jack shook his head. No. He wasn't going to let this destroy them. A dark discovery. The next morning, Jack drove to the police precinct. It felt strange walking through those doors again after years of retirement. The place still smelled the same. Coffee, sweat, and something stale that never quite went away. Maria was waiting for him in an empty conference room. A thick file sat on the table. "I pulled everything I could," she said. "But Jack, you're not gonna like what you find." Jack sat down and opened the file. The first thing he saw was a missing persons report. Name, Isabella de la Cruz. Age, 23. Status, presumed deceased. Jack's stomach dropped. Who is she? Maria hesitated. She was Marco Ruiz's girlfriend. According to informants, she was pregnant when she disappeared. We never found a body. Jack's fingers tightened around the paper. Pregnant. 7 years ago. That's their mother, he muttered. Maria nodded. Looks that way. Jack flipped through the file, scanning old reports, surveillance photos, and crime scene records. Then, he found something that made his blood run cold. A mugshot. The man in the photo had hollow eyes, sunken cheeks, and an eerie smirk. The name below it read. Mateo de la Cruz. Jack's mind reeled. Who is this? Maria exhaled. Mateo de la Cruz. Marco Ruiz's right-hand man. And Isabella's older brother. Jack's heart pounded. So, he was there that night? Maria hesitated. He was supposed to be. But his body was never found. Jack looked at her sharply. You think he's alive? Maria's expression was grim. If he is, Jack, then he might be the one who sent that letter. Jack felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. If Mateo de la Cruz was still alive, then he knew who the twins really were. And if he was a monster, like the letter claimed, then Jack's boys were in danger. The shadow that lurks. Jack drove home in a daze, gripping the wheel tightly. The more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Mateo de la Cruz had disappeared that night. But why? Had he abandoned his sister? Had he taken the babies and left them in that dumpster himself? Jack clenched his jaw. No. If he had done that, why would he send the letter now? Unless he had been watching them. The thought sent ice through Jack's veins. He had spent years keeping the boys safe, thinking the past was behind them. But now, it was creeping back. He pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a long moment, gripping the letter in his hands. Then, he stepped out, his sharp eyes scanning the neighborhood. Nothing seemed out of place. The quiet suburban street looked normal. But Jack's instincts told him otherwise. Someone was watching. And whoever it was, they weren't finished yet. The monster in the dark. That night, Jack locked every door, double-checked the windows, and kept his gun within arm's reach. Liam and Noah were asleep, unaware of the storm brewing around them. Jack sat at the kitchen table, staring at the letter again, his mind racing. Then, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. His heartbeat quickened as he answered. Who is this? A low voice chuckled on the other end. Jack Callahan, the voice murmured. Still playing house, I see. Jack's blood ran cold. Who are you? He demanded. You raised them well, the voice continued, ignoring the question. Better than I expected. Jack's grip tightened. What do you want? A pause. Then, the voice whispered. They were never meant to be yours. The line went dead. Jack's heart pounded. Mateo de la Cruz was alive. And he was coming for them. The predator returns. Jack Callahan sat in the darkness of his kitchen, his phone still gripped tightly in his hand. The silence after the call was deafening, a void filled with 1,000 unanswered questions and a single terrifying certainty: Mateo de la Cruz was alive. And he wanted the twins. Jack had spent years building a safe, happy life for Liam and Noah. He had buried the past, convinced himself that whatever happened in that alleyway 7 years ago had died with the men who lay in pools of blood that night. But the past was never really gone. It had only been waiting. Waiting for the right moment to strike. Jack exhaled slowly, forcing himself to think. Why now? Mateo had 7 years to come forward. Why wait? What had changed? Jack's gut told him that this wasn't just about blood ties. This was personal. A father's instinct. Jack moved through the house silently, checking every door, every window. He knew paranoia when he saw it, and right now, he didn't care if he was being paranoid, his instincts had never failed him before. Liam and Noah were asleep in their shared bedroom, their breathing soft and steady. Jack stood in the doorway, watching them. They had no idea how much danger they were in. No idea that the man whose blood ran through their veins was a predator lurking in the dark. He clenched his fists. No one was taking his boys. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, Jack was at the precinct before the sun rose. Maria Vasquez wasn't surprised to see him waiting at her desk. You look like hell, she muttered, sipping her coffee. Jack tossed his phone on her desk. I got a call. It was him. Maria stiffened. Mateo? Jack nodded. He's alive, Maria. And he knows about Liam and Noah. Maria's expression darkened. She sat up straighter. What did he say? Jack repeated the conversation word for word. When he finished, Maria let out a long breath. He's taunting you. He wants you to know he's out there. Jack leaned forward. We need to find him. Now. Maria hesitated. Jack, the case is cold. There's nothing on him. No arrests, no sightings. It's like he vanished. Jack's jaw tightened. People like him don't just vanish. He's somewhere, watching. Waiting. Maria rubbed her temples. Look, I'll run his name again, check for anything new. But Jack, if he really wants those kids back, he won't stop at a phone call. Jack already knew that. And it terrified him. Shadows in the dark. That night, Jack sat on the couch, his gun within arm's reach. He had never been an alarmist, but tonight, something felt different. At 2:34 a.m., the motion sensor at the front door beeped. Jack shot up, his instincts kicking in. He moved to the window, peering through the blinds. A black car sat across the street. Jack's heart pounded. Was this it? Was he coming now? Jack grabbed his gun and stepped outside. The cold night air bit at his skin, but he ignored it, moving toward the street with slow, deliberate steps. The car's engine was off, its windows dark. He stopped a few feet away. I see you. His voice was steady, controlled. If you're looking for trouble, you found it. Silence. Then, the driver's side door opened. A man stepped out, his face hidden under the shadows of the street lamp. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the confidence of someone who had nothing to fear. Jack tightened his grip on the gun. Who are you? The man didn't answer. Instead, he took a slow step forward. Then another. Jack raised his weapon. I won't ask again. The man finally spoke, his voice smooth, calculated. You always were a fighter, Callahan. Jack's breath caught. The voice from the phone. Mateo de la Cruz. Face to face with the devil. Jack's entire body tensed, his pulse pounding in his ears. Mateo was here. The man tilted his head slightly, studying Jack like a predator sizing up its prey. You've done well, he said softly. Raising them as your own. It's almost admirable. Jack's grip on the gun tightened. Stay the hell away from my boys. Mateo chuckled. Your boys? He took another step. No, Callahan. They were never yours to begin with. Jack took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. They were abandoned. Left for dead. I gave them a life. Mateo's expression didn't change. I never intended for them to be left there. Jack narrowed his eyes. Then why were they? Mateo's jaw clenched, and for the first time, something flickered in his eyes, anger. I trusted someone, he muttered. And they betrayed me. Jack frowned. Who? Mateo exhaled sharply, shaking his head. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you took something from me, Callahan. And I intend to take it back. Jack stepped forward, his gun still trained on Mateo's chest. You think I'm just gonna hand them over? He let out a humorless chuckle. You don't know me at all. Mateo smirked. I know exactly who you are. That's why I'm warning you. Jack's blood ran cold. Warning me? Mateo leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. You have something that belongs to me. And if you don't give them up willingly, he paused, letting the threat hang in the air. I'll take them. Jack's heart pounded. If you come near them, I will kill you. Mateo's smirk widened. We'll see. With that, he stepped back, turned, and got into the black car. Jack stood frozen as the engine roared to life. The car pulled away, disappearing into the darkness. Jack exhaled sharply, his hands shaking. This wasn't over. Mateo wasn't going to stop. Jack turned back toward the house, his mind racing. He had spent years teaching Liam and Noah how to ride bikes, how to read, how to tie their shoes. He had held them when they cried, cheered them on at soccer games, kissed their scraped knees. He had been their father in every way that mattered. And now, a monster had come to take them away. Jack took a deep breath, his eyes darkening. Over my dead body, the hunt begins. Jack barely slept that night. Every shadow outside the window felt like a threat, every creak in the house like an intruder. He sat at the kitchen table, his gun resting beside his hand, his mind playing Mateo's words over and over again. You have something that belongs to me. And if you don't give them up willingly, I'll take them. Jack had fought his entire life to protect the innocent. He had seen children taken from their homes, mothers weeping in police stations, fathers with hollow eyes after losing the ones they loved. He had sworn to himself, long before he even knew Liam and Noah, that he would never let that happen on his watch. He wasn't about to break that promise now. As the first light of dawn filtered through the windows, Jack stood up, made himself a strong cup of coffee, and picked up his phone. It was time to go on the offensive. Calling in old favors. The first person he called was Maria. Jack, it's 6 in the morning, she grumbled. You think I slept, he shot back. Mateo was here. The sound of rustling sheets stopped. What? Jack quickly filled her in. The phone call. The black car. The face-to-face meeting. Maria swore under her breath. All right. I'll put some feelers out, see if I can track him. But Jack, she hesitated. You need to be careful. Mateo's not just some street thug. He's calculated. He doesn't make threats he can't follow through on. Jack exhaled. I know. That's why I need to find him first. After hanging up, Jack made his next call, to an old friend, someone who operated outside the law. Jack Callahan, a deep voice answered. Haven't heard from you in a while. Yeah, well, I need a favor, Jack said. I need eyes on someone. A chuckle. I take it this isn't a friendly reunion? Jack's voice hardened. No. It's life or death. There was a pause. Then, text me the details. I'll see what I can dig up. Jack ended the call, his mind already spinning. He couldn't sit back and wait for Mateo to make his move. He had to be 2 steps ahead. A father's lessons. Liam and Noah woke up a little after 7, completely unaware of the storm brewing around them. Jack made them breakfast, pancakes, their favorite, forcing himself to act normal. But his mind was elsewhere. As they ate, he studied them. 7 years old, full of life. Liam, always the louder one, was talking about a new game he wanted. Noah, quieter and more reserved, focused on stacking pieces of his pancake like a tower. They were innocent. And Mateo wanted to steal that innocence away. Jack took a deep breath. It was time for a hard conversation. Boys, he said, keeping his voice steady. I need to talk to you about something important. Liam looked up, syrup on his chin. Are we in trouble? Jack shook his head. No, buddy. But I need you to listen carefully, okay? The boys exchanged glances before nodding. Jack leaned forward, his tone firm but gentle. I want you to remember this. If a stranger ever comes up to you and says they know me, or that they're supposed to take you somewhere, you do not go with them. You scream, you run, and you find a safe place. Noah frowned. Like if we get lost at the store? Exactly, Jack said. You find a police officer, a teacher, or someone you trust. Liam, always the more adventurous one, crossed his arms. But what if we can fight them? Jack gave a small smile. You're tough, kid. But bad people don't always fight fair. Noah chewed his lip. Is something wrong, Daddy? Jack's heart clenched. He couldn't tell them the whole truth. Not yet. Everything's fine, he lied. I just want you to be prepared. The boys nodded, though Noah's sharp eyes lingered on Jack a little longer than usual. A dangerous lead. By midday, Jack got a call from his contact. "I found something," the voice said. "Mateo's not just back, he's been here for months." Jack's grip on the phone tightened. "Where?" "Can't pin an exact location yet, but he's been operating under a different name. Low profile, no flashy moves. But get this, he's got connections with some heavy hitters." Jack's gut twisted. Cartel? Worse. People who make cartels look like kids playing with firecrackers. Whatever he's planning, it's big. Jack ran a hand down his face. This wasn't just about the boys. "Keep digging," he ordered. His contact hesitated. "Jack, don't go after this guy alone." Jack didn't respond. He had never been one to wait for backup. The setup. By evening, Jack had a plan. If Mateo wanted a war, Jack would bring it to him first. He arranged for Maria to increase patrols in the neighborhood, subtle, but effective. He installed extra security cameras around the house. Then, he did something he hadn't done in years. He went into his basement and opened an old wooden crate. Inside were weapons he had stored away after retirement, a Glock 19, a tactical knife, and a bulletproof vest. His old life was catching up to him. And this time, it was personal. The trap is set. Jack didn't have to wait long. That night, just past midnight, the motion sensor beeped again. Jack was ready. He moved silently, gun in hand, peering out through the window. A shadow moved near the backyard fence. Jack's heart pounded. Mateo. Jack slipped out the back door, his footsteps silent on the damp grass. He moved along the side of the house, cutting off the figure's escape route. "Not very subtle, are you?" Jack said, his voice cold. The figure turned, and it wasn't Mateo. It was a young man, barely out of his teens, his face pale in the moonlight. Jack raised his gun. "Who the hell are you?" The kid put his hands up. I was sent to warn you." Jack narrowed his eyes. "By who?" The kid swallowed. "Mateo." Jack's blood ran cold. "Why?" The kid's voice shook. "Because he's coming. And he's not coming alone." Jack's pulse pounded in his ears. "How many?" The kid hesitated. "A lot. You need to run." Jack stared at him. "Run?" "No. That wasn't an option. If Mateo wanted war, he would get it. But Jack wasn't running. He was going to end this, the final stand." Jack Callahan stood in the cold night air, his gun steady in his hands as he stared at the trembling young man in front of him. The boy, barely out of his teens, had fear written all over his face. "You said Mateo is coming," Jack said, his voice dangerously calm. "How soon?" The kid swallowed hard. I don't know. A few days, maybe less. He's been waiting, watching. And now he's ready." Jack clenched his jaw. He knew Mateo wouldn't be coming alone. He'd bring men, killers, people who had no problem tearing apart families for their own twisted gain. "Why are you telling me this?" Jack asked, studying the kid's nervous expression. The boy shifted on his feet. "Because I owe you. You don't remember me, but, when I was a kid, you arrested my uncle. He used to beat my mom. The night you took him away was the first night she ever felt safe." Jack blinked. He had arrested hundreds of men in his career, maybe thousands. He didn't remember this one. But it didn't matter. This kid had just given him something precious, time. Jack lowered his gun slightly. "You did the right thing coming here. Now, get out of town. If Mateo finds out you warned me, you're dead." The kid nodded quickly. Be careful, Mr. Callahan. He's not just coming to scare you. He's coming to take them. The words hit Jack like a hammer to the chest. The kid ran off into the night, disappearing down the street. Jack stood there for a long moment, the weight of the situation settling in. He had two choices, run or fight. He never had been much for running. Preparing for war. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Jack had already turned his home into a fortress. He reinforced the doors and windows. Installed additional cameras. He even had Maria pull some favors to get a few unmarked police cars to patrol the neighborhood under the radar. But Jack knew that when Mateo came, he wouldn't come through the front door like some petty thief. He would come like a ghost in the night, with men just as ruthless as he was. So Jack did something else. He trained his boys. All right, he said, kneeling in front of them in the backyard. We're gonna play a new game. It's called What to Do If Daddy Says Go. Liam and Noah looked at each other, confused. It's like hide and seek, Jack explained, keeping his voice light. If I ever tell you to go, you run to our safe place. The basement? Noah asked. Jack shook his head. Nope. That's too easy to trap. There's a tunnel under the tool shed. It leads into the neighbor's backyard. If I say, go, you run through it and don't look back. Liam's eyes widened. Cool. Like spies? Jack forced a smile. Yeah, just like spies. But inside, his heart was heavy. No child should have to prepare for something like this. Yet here they were. Jack knew this wasn't just about protecting them physically. This was psychological warfare. If Mateo got inside their heads, if he made them doubt Jack, that was just as dangerous as any bullet. He had to make sure they never wavered. Who do you trust? Jack asked. The boys answered in unison. You, Daddy. Jack swallowed the lump in his throat. And who do you never trust? Liam frowned. Strangers? Jack nodded. That's right. Especially if they say they know me. Noah hesitated. What if they say they're our real family? Jack's gut twisted. This was the moment he had been dreading. He took a deep breath. Family isn't just about blood, he said gently. It's about who's there for you, who loves you, who protects you. And no matter what anyone says, I am your father. Noah nodded slowly. Okay. Liam, however, frowned. Are bad guys coming? Jack sighed. I hope not. But he wasn't counting on hope. The night falls. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban street. Jack sat in the darkened living room, his gun in his lap, his body tensed for the inevitable. He had already sent Maria a message, if you don't hear from me by morning, check the house. Then, the waiting began. The first sign came around midnight. The motion sensor went off. Jack's heart pounded as he checked the monitor. 3 figures moving toward the house from the backyard. This was it. He moved swiftly, silently, positioning himself near the back door. The house was dark, the boys hidden safely in their room. He had drilled them, don't make a sound. Don't move unless I tell you to. Jack gripped his gun. He had the element of surprise. He had the home field advantage. The first man tried to pick the lock. Jack let him. The moment the door creaked open, Jack fired. The silenced gun spat out a single shot, hitting the man in the leg. He collapsed with a muffled groan. The other 2 moved fast, but Jack was faster. He swept low, firing 2 more rounds. One hit a man in the shoulder, the other grazed his ribs. They weren't dead, but they were out of the fight. That left only one man unaccounted for. Mateo. A slow clap echoed from the darkness outside. Jack turned, gun ready. Mateo stood at the edge of the backyard, completely unarmed, a twisted smile on his face. Impressive, he mused. I was hoping you'd still have your edge. Jack kept his aim steady. It's over, Mateo. Walk away. Mateo chuckled. You really think this is over? You think this was about brute force? Jack's grip on the gun tightened. If you think I'll ever let you take them. Mateo shook his head. I don't need to take them, Callahan. I just need them to question you. Jack's blood ran cold. They're gonna start wondering why they don't look like you, Mateo continued. They're gonna ask questions. And when the time is right, they will come to me. Jack's heart pounded. This wasn't just an attack. This was psychological warfare. Mateo smirked. Enjoy your time with them, Callahan. Because one day, they'll learn the truth. And when they do... His grin widened. They'll hate you for it. Jack didn't hesitate. He fired. Mateo ducked and disappeared into the darkness. Jack ran forward, gun ready, but Mateo was gone. A cold wind blew through the backyard. Jack exhaled, lowering his gun. This wasn't over. Mateo wasn't going to stop. But Jack didn't care. Because as he stepped back inside, he saw two little boys who loved him. And as long as he had them, Mateo would never win.